So here we are. This is the first lecture in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is on demand and supply. And as usual, I've got quite a bit, actually. I'm just going to hit the highlights of some of the stuff that's in the news. First thing, this is from the Roanoke Times. You all know that the city of Petersburg is going bankrupt. Right near us, near Richmond. It says that they've had all kinds of problems and they've been borrowing money for a long time, and now it's catching up with them. So, so we'll see what happens there. Another article is from Wall Street. U.S. urged not to settle health insurer suits. Congressional Republicans are warning the Obama administration not to settle with insurers that have sued the government over an Affordable Care Act program to compensate them for losses under the law, saying such a move would bypass spending limits set by Congress. So, in other words, in order for the insurance companies to agree to this this health care law that we're under, the government said that we will compensate you for any losses. Well, they are experiencing huge losses, and so now they're suing the federal government for payment. And Congress is saying, well, if we pay you, that's going to greatly supersede our spending limits. So, and of course, what's the main reason why insurance companies are leaving the healthcare system or going out of business? The main reason is that the whole law, the success of the law was all based on young people like you buying insurance. Since young people don't make many claims because you are the healthier portion of society, the thinking was that if you were to pay enough, then you could subsidize the elderly people who are not as healthy. And but of course, what happened? Yeah, I mean, a lot of you have not. It's cheaper for most of you to pay the penalty, which is $695 this year, or 2.5% of your income. So you either pay that penalty. That penalty is a lot cheaper than the insurance you can buy. So because not enough young people are buying insurance, these insurance companies are. A lot of them are going out of business, and they're leaving the. Some states only have one provider for insurance. People don't have any choice; they just have just one, to buy from. Anyway, another thing here is this is a big ad. The Department of Justice, Department of the Interior, and Department of the Army announced this month they will reconsider approval part of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Anyway, there was a pipeline that cost about $4 billion to build, and they are halfway through, and they have received federal and state approvals over 2 years, which was upheld by a federal judge, but now they're saying that they can't complete the pipeline. Now, what's this got to do with? Well, what this got to do with the rule of law. I mean, how can American companies make investments, in this case, the tune of $4 billion, and not rely on the rule of law? Because the law says that everything is okay, but the executive branch of the government says, well, now we don't want you to complete the pipeline. So it's not a case of pipeline or no pipeline. It's a case of are we a nation of law, or are we a nation of federal agencies just making decisions however they want? Yeah. Anyway. Tech issues bedevil lenders on swaps. This is the Commodity Futures and Trading Commission in the past several months has fined Deutsche Bank, a German bank, J.P. Morgan and Barclays over failure to report derivatives trades in a timely and accurate way. Now, I've mentioned the derivatives market to you before. It's a $600 trillion market. That's 5 times the GDP of the whole world. And what a derivatives market is simply two people make a bet on an outcome of some future event. And so the paperwork is very sketchy oftentimes in this market, and yet banks have to give this complete reporting to the federal government on, I mean, imagine reporting on hundreds of millions of trades and trillions of dollars and trying to keep track of all that and making reports to the government. I mean, it's an impossible situation. And the government's saying, well, since you can't do that, we're going to fine you. Anyway, that's kind of interesting. Central bankers at wit's end, editorial page. This is an article about how the central bankers are stymied. They just don't know what to do. The negative interest rates. Says more striking was the Fed's new consensus view of future economic growth. Now, their predictions in the future is from about 2% a year, but in the past 18 months, growth has actually declined by 2.5%. So if you go back 18 months, not only have we not grown, but we have gone back about 2.5%. And even a growth rate of 2% is very optimistic. The central bank may raise rates in December and beyond despite growth rates that in an earlier era would have been defined as stagnation. So in other words, and lastly, on a very serious note, both the Roanoke Times and the Wall Street Journal have been talking about Syria, and this is from the Wall Street Journal. The ceasefire all but collapsed, scuttling hopes that two sides would be able to cooperate in a meaningful way in fighting Islamic State and other military groups. So, the United States, States is fighting the Assad regime, and Russia is supporting Assad against ISIS. And the reason I mention this is a very volatile situation. And some people believe that it could very easily lead to World War III. So, yeah, against Russia and China.
Mobilize their aircraft here.
Well, that's a big thing. You see, yeah, and not only that, not only is America mobilizing, but they have reneged on some agreements, and we are now installing anti-missile stations right on Russia's border, which could easily be converted to offensive weapons, and Russia can't tolerate this. And with the conflict that we are fighting Russia in Syria, and that could easily spill over into a wider war. And China is supporting Russia. And the United States military is not as strong as either. Both Russia and China's military as far surpasses the United States. And both combined, it's especially if you bring in atomic weapons into this, it's a very scary situation. Very serious. I mean, you ought to, be aware of what's happening over there. Any questions about that? You look puzzled.
Yeah,
It's kind of shocked.
it doesn't make much sense.
Doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make any sense. Make no sense
The logistics
whatsoever.
behind it, like you said, aircraft carrier. You only have one.
Yeah, because that's it.
But,
It only goes every 10 years. They go forward every 10 years, turn around.
you know,
and go back.
the last time they did it,
Whether, you know,
they have it tugged out.
Yeah, I know.
whether, you can't use logic with this because, I mean, the bottom line
But it's
is,
a show.
it's not how we feel or believe, but it's how the Russians feel and believe. Because, you know, no matter how insane the situation or how much you would disagree with it, that doesn't mean anything. All that means anything is what is the action between us and Russia. Anyway, I do have a video for you. It's by Paul Craig Roberts. Now, the first part of this video is actually on your website. I mean, the whole video is on your website. I'm going to pick it up about 40 minutes into the video. But the first part of the video, if you're interested, does talk about our conflict between, you know, us and Russia. But I'm not going to show that to you. If you're interested, you can watch it. But this part of the video is about our present economy. And in my opinion, Paul Craig Roberts has got, you know, just a real good understanding of what's happening economically. So let's listen. This is about 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes long.
It's not going to raise interest rates. They haven't been able to raise it. They said they're going to raise rates 4 times. They've raised them 0 times. I guess if they want to crash the economy. Your appraisal on the economy, well, you once told me that you were surprised, and coming from a PhD in economics and a former assistant Treasury Secretary, you said, I'm surprised they kept this going so long. Your appraisal of the economy, before we close.
There's no economy here. It was offshore. So the kind of high productivity, high value added jobs that sustained the middle class and provided ladders for upward mobility. These were sent to China. This is why China developed so quickly. The things that we consume, like Apple computers, they're made in China by Chinese factories. So the manufacturing jobs were moved off, and then we moved off the high-tech professional skill jobs of software engineering, research, design, all these things. And even architectural work, accounting work. So the kinds of jobs college graduates would take, they're diminished. And if you don't have high productivity jobs, then the productivity labor force goes down, which everything shows. They're all worried, the productivity's falling. I don't know why. It's because they moved the productive jobs offshore. And then we have a financial system that's a house of cards. It's based on creating massive amount of money in order to purchase financial assets. The Fed has purchased bonds until the price is so high, the interest rates are essentially 0. And the Fed has the Japanese central bank, the British central bank, the European central bank doing the same thing. In fact, the European central bank even purchases corporate bonds. So this deprives the population of the interest income because the central banks print all the money, buy the bonds, and drive the prices up. So elderly people have no income on retirement. They have a hard time helping kids, grandkids. We have a situation where half of 25-year-old Americans live at home with their parents because they can't find employment that pays enough to support an independent existence. We have more Americans 24 through 34 years of age living at home with parents than living independently because they can't find jobs that pay enough to support an independent existence. There's no growth in real consumer income. In my opinion, there's no growth in the economy. They produce the image of growth by undercounting inflation so that there's no inflation to deflate the nominal GDP number, the nominal consumer income number, because they don't measure inflation. So if you don't deflate the numbers by the real inflation, it looks like you have some growth. but we don't see any signs of it in the workforce. We see that the labor force participation rate has continued to fall during all of these years of the alleged recovery. Well, the labor force participation rate never falls during recovery. It rises because people are entering the labor force to take advantage of the strong economy and the jobs. So there isn't any economy. There's a house of cards that's held together by central bank money creation. The money flows into financial assets. That's what keeps the stock market up. And it flows into bonds, which is why there's essentially zero interest rates, because the price of the bonds are bid so high, there's no interest to be paid.
This is going to end badly, though. This is going to end badly, correct? I mean, they're going to run out of options, are they not?
I just don't see how it can continue. You know, how do you have a consumer market if people's incomes are growing? And when they have, you know, people have no discretionary income because after they pay housing and food, whatever they got left goes into bank fees and interest on their credit cards and home mortgages and car payments. And, you know, the economy is so financialized that discretionary income is diverted to the banks in the form of interest payments and fees. So there's nothing to sustain a growth in consumer expenditures. And it's very difficult for people to be able to buy a house when they can't save a down payment, or when the housing prices are too high that their income simply doesn't qualify. You know, it used to be you could get a home loan to buy a house that the mortgage service was 1/4 of your monthly income. Then they moved it up to half. So if half of your monthly income is servicing the mortgage, where's your discretionary spending power? How can you go out and be a consumer or drive consumer demand? You can't. And so the economy is essentially a hoax. It looks like it's real because they can keep the stock market up, because all the money the central banks create, it's got nowhere to go. It goes into financial asset prices. It goes into stocks. So we now have a price earnings ratio of 25, whereas it used to be 12.
How long does it take for the house of cards to go under? When does the house of cards go under in your estimation? I'm not looking for a date and time, but the house of cards is going to collapse in your estimation, correct?
I think that what happens is you just get an increase in poverty. And therefore people can't buy things, and so stores close, and so you can't even get a job as a retail clerk, and the stuff sold online declines because somebody's got money. And look, when you've got half of the young generation, 25-year-old Americans, half of them living in their childhood rooms at home with their parents because they haven't enough income from the jobs they can get to support an independent existence, then you've got the end of an economy. I never heard of 34-year-old people living at home with their parents. I mean, so I think you can go on a while, and it's just a slow impoverishment. It's just, there'll come a time when the kids can't get $600 to line up to buy a new iPhone. And, you know, there was a lot of fat in the economy. There was savings of the elder generation. There were pensions that people had. You see, all these low interest rates threaten the pension funds. They threaten the insurance companies because there's no fixed income from the insurance companies to balance a stock or real estate portfolio with. So a zero interest rate simply destroys the ability of insurance companies, pension funds, to manage their affairs. And so there are all kinds of things can go wrong. And we still don't know what the derivative situation is. There's so many derivatives. I don't think anybody has a very good understanding of what they are, how they can be serviced, how they can be covered. And so I don't know, but it has gone on far longer than I thought it could. And I think the reason is none of the old rules apply. The rule is the central banks are going to keep creating money to keep it all afloat. So maybe they can keep it afloat a long time, but
Or maybe it'll blow up one weekend and we'll all be sunk, I don't know.
could blow up. But you see, we're sunk anyhow because it's a constant impoverishment. See, it means people are impoverished if they are of working age. They're out of college, they're working age, they have to live at home with their parents. Then the economy's already dead, isn't it?
Yeah.
Half of the new generation, half of the new workforce living with their parents, according to the Federal Reserve.
Dr. Paul Curtis, go ahead.
It seems to me that it's going to die slowly, whether it collapses or not. In fact, it is dying.
Well, that's cheery information, isn't it? Any questions about any of that? No questions? Yeah.
Well, is he saying because we moved the workforce overseas, that's why we don't have jobs because people aren't anymore?
Yeah, it's a big reason. I mean, it's the regulations and taxes of America that have driven production companies into foreign lands. And a country cannot survive on service-type jobs. Long-term growth depends on a healthy, productive sector of the economy, and that is what we do not have in America.
Isn't that like prohibition on the problem, I guess? Because I guess now we kind of moved into an age of technology, so I guess.
But even the high technology, yes, but even the high-tech jobs, many of them are in foreign countries. I mean, the fact is that there's, this may be an oversimplification, but the fact is that there are not enough high-paying jobs for college graduates. Now, whatever the reason, that's a fact. Any other questions? See, when I was your age, any college grad could get a high-paying job. It was rare that one could not. See, things have changed, and it's not beneficial to your generation. So you should be concerned of why the case is as it is. Why are there not enough high-paying jobs? And that's really what this course is all about. So anyway, let's get to these demand and supply. Let's see, slideshow from the beginning. Now, economists love graphs and charts. So the reason why this chapter is the fourth chapter is because you've already had some knowledge of how markets work. But what this chapter does is it simply shows you how markets work in a graphical sense. So what is a market? This is a study of markets. How do markets work? So what is a market? Well, a market is simply a place where buyers and sellers can meet. I mean, we call Kroger's or Food Line supermarkets because they are places that sellers sell food and buyers know that there's food available, and so it's a physical place where buyers and sellers meet. And that's what a market is. And what is demand? The relation showing the quantities of a good consumers are willing and able to buy. Notice I got the words willing and able underlined. At various prices during a given time period, other things constant. So what the demand curve is going to show us is how many units consumers are willing, that it takes a want to, and able, that takes money, at various prices. Other things constant. So one thing you've really got to pay attention to is that when we change price, we're going to assume that nothing else changes. And then we come to some conclusions. So what is a demand curve? A curve showing the quantities of a commodity demanded at various possible prices, other things constant. Now that other things constant means, okay, we're going to change price here and then we're going to evaluate what happens, but we're going to assume that everything else is constant, meaning that nothing else is going to change. Now that is an assumption. I've talked to you before about how economics is like a game. And games have rules and definitions. And this is one of the rules of this game of economics, is that when we change price, we're going to observe what happens, but we're going to assume that the only thing changing is price and nothing else. So what is a change in the quantity demanded? A movement along the demand curve in response to a change in price, other things constant. Now, one of your biggest challenges of this chapter is to know the difference between a change in the quantity demanded and a change in demand. Now, I can call that thing over there a door, and I can call this thing here a computer. And those are two different things. A change in the quantity demanded is one thing, a change in demand is something else. Those are two different things. If I say there's a change in the quantity demanded, that means that price has changed, and so we're moving along a stationary curve and we're looking to see what happens to the quantity demanded. But if I say demand has changed, then that means that the whole curve has shifted to the right or to the left. Now you're going to have lots of practice with this, and I give you lots of practice with these practice quizzes, that are on your website. But that's something you're going to have to train your mind to. A change in demand means one thing. That's when the whole demand curve changes. A change in the quantity demanded means that the curve is not changing, but what's changing is on the horizontal axis. The quantity demanded is changing. Why do demand curves have a negative slope? Well, at a higher price, consumers will buy fewer units, and at a lower price, they will buy more units. Well, that's pretty obvious, right? I mean, price goes up, everything else being equal, you'll buy less, right? Price goes down, then you may, at least you can afford to buy more. I mean, that's pretty simple. But that's called a negative slope. Demand curves have got a downward slope. It's a negative slope, which shows an inverse relationship between price and quantity. Because as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. The price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Now, we're not trying to design a system here. What we're doing, rather, is looking at how markets work, a free market, and then drawing a picture to try to describe what it is we're seeing. Okay? And that's all that this chapter is. It's just pictures of what we observe, how free markets work. See, and that's what's called an inverse relationship. Price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. See, one thing goes up, the other thing goes down. It's called That's called an inverse relationship. A direct relationship would mean that if one thing goes up, the other goes up. But with demand curves, we say that there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. Okay, so what is the law of demand? The quantity of a good demanded is inversely related to its price, other things constant. That's what we call the law of demand. So again, I mean, this is really nothing that should be new, but it's just a graphical explanation of what we observe. Now, this is sort of a minor point. I'm not even sure why I teach it, other than the fact that most textbooks do. But what is a demand schedule? It shows the specific quantity of a good or service that people are willing and able to buy at different prices. And this would be a demand schedule, for example. You know, if the price of milk goes down, then the quantity goes up. And this is shown on a table. Now, economists use graphs and tables. There are advantages and disadvantages. A table has an advantage in that it can be very specific. You've got actual numbers. You've got here like 2 columns with specific numbers. Graphs are less specific, but it's easier to see the bigger picture with a graph. So when an economist wants to be very specific, he may use a table. But if an economist wants to show the bigger picture at a glance, then he may use a graph instead of a table. So when things are associated with tables, we call them demand schedules. And that's a minor point. We really don't have to know that. And here we have a demand curve. And this, of course, is a graph, not a table. And notice here, when price goes down from $1.25 to 25 cents, does demand change? Now let me show you that again. See, price goes down. What's changing here? Well, what's changing is down here on the horizontal axis. What's changing is the quantity demanded. As price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Now, has demand changed? And the answer is no. Demand is this blue line, and this blue line did not change when price changed. Now, I know I've said this several times, but I know I've been teaching this long enough, and I know that students just have a problem with this concept. But it should be a fairly easy concept. See, now why do consumers buy more as prices decrease and less when price increases? Now, you might think that that's just, well, obvious. But economists aren't satisfied with explanations like that. I mean, if you ask an economist, why is there an inverse relationship between price and quantity, and he'd say, well, it's that way because, well, it's that way. It's just obvious. Well, that's not very scientific. And economists like to be very specific. They like to think of themselves as scientists, and that they can prove things, and they can be very exact. So they came up with 2 explanations of why there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. And one explanation is called the substitution effect, and the other is called the income effect. So we're going to look at both. They explain the same thing, but in a different way. So what is the substitution effect? The substitution effect is that when a price of a good falls, consumers will substitute it for other goods which are now relatively expensive. You see, many things have substitutes. You know, different, a truck is a substitute for a car, for example. Sometimes a bicycle might be a substitute for a car. I mean, not most cases, but maybe sometimes it can. Or beyond a certain price, maybe it would be a substitute. I mean, if cars were so expensive that no one could afford them, more people would ride bicycles. So in that case, you see, a bicycle would be a substitute for a car. So many things have substitutes. And what this is saying is that when a price, if two things are related and they can be substituted one for another, if the price of one goes up, then people will tend to buy more of the other. And that's called the substitution effect. It's an explanation of why demand curves are downward sloping. All right? And the other explanation, which explains the same thing but in a different way, is the income effect. So what is money income? The number of dollars received per period of time, such as $100 per week. That's what we mean by money income. So what is real income? Income measured in terms of the goods and services it can buy. If prices increase 10%, then what relative to your income, then what happens to your buying power? It goes down by 10%. So if prices increase 10% relative to your income, then economists say that your real income has gone down by 10%, even though your money income may have not changed. If you're making the same amount of money from one time period to the next, see, your money income stayed the same. But your real income goes down if prices increase relative to your income. So what determines demand, money income or real income? Well, what determines demand is real income. I mean, your buying power is based on your real income, not your money income. So what is the income effect? A fall in the price of a good increases consumers' real income, making them more able to purchase all goods, so the quantity demanded increases. See, a fall in the price increases your real income, so you can afford to buy more goods and services. So a fall in price leads to an increase in the quantity demanded. See, that's another explanation of why demand curves have a negative slope. Okay, and what is individual demand? The demand for an individual consumer. Now, in microeconomics, which is Econ 202, we may consider individual demand curves, especially as it relates to a business. But in this course, this is macroeconomics. In macroeconomics, we look at the economy in the large, and we're not so concerned with individual demand. We're concerned with what is called aggregate demand. And what is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the summation of all individual demand curves. To see, in macroeconomics, we're interested in the whole economy, and it's the change in aggregate demand that determines things like inflation and unemployment and things like that. So it's always aggregate demand in macroeconomics that we're interested in. Market demand, the sum, or you can call it market demand too. I called it aggregate demand, but you can call it market demand. It's total demand is what it is, the sum of individual demands of all consumers in the market. So what is a normal good? See, a lot of this is just definition so far. It's like learning a foreign language. It's not fun, perhaps, learning definitions. And learning the grammar may not even be fun, but once you learn the vocabulary and you understand the grammar, then it may be interesting to go talk to somebody, in French or Spanish or something. And that's kind of like what this is. It's not fun to learn these terms, but here in just a few minutes, we're going to start using these terms to explain certain economic phenomena. And that's when it becomes more interesting. So a normal good, a good for which demand increases as consumer income rises. And I hope you all shut your car windows because it sounds like it's raining. So what is an inferior good? Again, more definitions. A good for which demand decreases as consumer incomes rise. See, will there be, if your income goes up, or if incomes go up, again, we're talking about aggregate demand or, total demand, market demand. If incomes go up, will there be an increase in demand for every good and service? And the answer is no. Why? Because there are inferior goods and normal goods. Inferior goods are goods that people buy less of as their incomes increase. Normal goods are goods that people buy more of as their incomes increase. For example, in most cases, people would prefer to eat steak over hot dogs. So as their incomes increase, their real incomes increase. Now, if I say income, by the way, I mean real income. I mean, that's one of those rules again in economics. Okay, I don't have to always say money income and real income, because if I say income, by the rules, I mean real income and not money income. If I want to talk about money income, I'd say money income. But if I'm just talking about income, if I'm talking about real income, I can just say income. So an inferior good, what this is saying is that as people's plural now, as people's incomes increase, they will tend. Now notice this word tend. Now see, am I saying that if people's incomes goes up, people will buy more steak and less hot dogs? And see, I'm not saying that, because I'm using the word tend. See, what I'm saying is that if people's incomes go up, there is a tendency for people to buy more steak and therefore buy less hot dogs. And that's something in economics too. We always use the word tendency. We can't say for sure that this or that will happen, but we can say that under these circumstances, there's a tendency for this or that to happen. And that's what we're saying here. If people's incomes goes up, there's a tendency for them to buy fewer hot dogs and more steak. And therefore, hot dogs would be an inferior good, and steak would be a normal good. If people's incomes go up, there's a tendency for them to buy more new cars and fewer used cars. Used cars would be an inferior good, new cars would be a normal good. See what I mean? So there are inferior goods and there are normal goods. Now, complements. Goods that are related in such a way that an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. Now, if two things are related, they can be related as either being complementary goods or they can be substitutes. Now, a complementary good is two goods that kind of go together, like hot dogs and mustard kind of go together. See, cars and gasoline kind of go together. See, those are complementary goods. I mean, if people drive more cars or or if the mileage they drive increases, then there's going to be an increase in the demand for gasoline, correct? Because gasoline and cars are related. The more you drive, the more gasoline we consume. So those two things are related. Now, sometimes two things aren't related at all. They're not substitutes, they're not complements. But if they're related somehow, then they're either related as being complementary goods, meaning they kind of go together, or they're related in terms of being substitutes one for another, that you can use this or you can use that. Ketchup might be a substitute for mustard in some cases, for example. Those would be substitutes. So substitutes, okay, goods that are related in such a way that an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. Yeah, Netflix and cable would be a perfect example. I have a Roku player and I get Netflix, but I don't have TV, or what you call it? Cable, yeah, cable. I don't have cable TV, and so, but I can watch movies and I can get YouTube and I can do a lot of things, so, that is a substitute for a television subscription. So an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. If two things are substitutes, and the price of one goes up, if the price of television, television goes way up. Am I using the right terms? I don't even have it, but I pay for cable. I get my internet through cable, and because I have through Chantel, and because I have cable, I get the internet, and through the internet I can get Netflix and Amazon, videos and YouTube and all that other stuff. But I don't get TV programs. What do you call it?
So you don't have cable. You have the cable package, but you don't have cable.
Okay, so I don't have TV, I don't have cable. All right. I wasn't sure the lingo there, but yeah, that would be right. So the price of cable goes way up. What are a lot of people going to do? Well, they're going to do what I did. They're going to say, well, I don't need the cable, but I could still keep, internet service. Say the price of one goes up, the demand, price of one goes up, then the demand for the other goes up, because these are substitutes. And what is a change in demand? A shift in a given demand curve caused by a change in one of the non-price determinants of demand for the good. So in other words, what causes a shift in demand? Well, what can cause a shift in demand, which means the whole curve is going to shift, something has to change other than price. Now that something is what we call a non-price determinant. Something that determines demand, but it's not price. That's called a non-price determinant. So if something affects demand, but it's not price, then a change will cause a shift in the curve, either to the right or to the left. So, and this would be, gracious, this would represent an increase in the demand for milk. Now notice here I didn't say an increase in the quantity demanded. I said an increase in demand. Why? Because the whole curve shifted from D to D prime. Well, what caused this shift? Well, what caused this shift is a change in something other than price, called a non-price determinant. Something changed other than price that determined demand in this case. And that's what caused the shift. In this case, it's an increase. An increase from D to D prime. Shift to the right would be an increase. Important, know the difference between a change in the quantity demanded and a change in demand. And that's something that, that I've emphasized throughout this whole lecture. A change in the quantity demanded occurs when price changes. A change in demand occurs when a non-price determinant changes. You do get a lot of practice with this, and there are several questions on the test that will test you if you know the difference between a change in demand and a change in the quantity demanded. So that should bring us to some questions like what can cause a change in the demand? In other words, what are some of these non-price determinants that can affect demand? And this little guy here, what he's doing is he's showing you to change the page. Go to the next page. So here on the next page we have 6 reasons, 6 causes of a change in demand. These are non-price determinants.
So the prices of related goods is a non-price determinant?
Yeah, because it's not the price. Well, I'm glad you asked that because this is one of those difficulties that students have.
So the price of gas going up
If 2 things are related, if the price of the substitute changes, then the demand for the first good will change. So it's really not a change in the price. It's not in a change in the price of the thing that you're buying. It's a change in the price of a good that's related. See, so it's a non-price determinant.
So the price of gas going up would increase the demand for electric cars. Would be a non-price.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some of these non-price determinants? These are the things that will cause shifts in demand other than price. So the number in the market, we economists have observed that that there is a tendency. Now, notice I'm using that word tendency again. I'm not saying that the more people you have in the market, that the higher demand will be. I'm saying that the more people in the market, that there will be a tendency for demand to increase. So he must have had an emergency of some sort. But number in the market, it's like, for many years, Kroger's gave double coupons on certain weeks. And they were the 3rd and the 4th weeks. Well, why would Kroger's give double coupons on the 3rd week? No, it'd be the 2nd week of the month and the 4th week of the month. Well, the reason is that people normally get paid twice a month, and there's a tendency for people to go do a big grocery shopping once they get paid. So what happens with grocery stores is that in the first week, that a whole bunch of people come into the store because they just got paid, and in the 3rd week, there's a lot of people come into the store because they just got paid. But that means that demand is down in the 2nd week and in 4th week. So in order to draw more people into the stores on those slow weeks, Kroger's used to offer double coupons. Now the double coupons wasn't on every good, but just specified goods. But the thinking is that if you can draw people into the market, then there will be a tendency for them to buy more. It's the same reasoning as why the milk is always waiting back to the store. all the dairy products are in the back of the store because dairy products are things that people buy on a daily basis, and so they got to walk through all kinds of aisles to get there because, on the way they might decide to buy this and decide to buy that. I mean, it's all marketing. So the more people that you can draw into the market, then there's a tendency for demand to increase. The fewer people in the market, then the lower demand tends to be lower. Again, I'm very conscious of using that word tends. I'm not saying it will be this way, but I'm saying that there's a tendency for things to be this way. Now, consumer incomes can change. Of course, the income that we're talking about here is real income. So if real incomes increase, there will be an increase in demand for normal goods, but there will be a decrease in demand for inferior goods. See, in both cases, we're having a shift in the whole demand curve. The demand curve either shifts to the right or shifts to the left. It shifts to the right if you're talking about normal goods, and then shift to the left if you're talking about inferior goods. Prices of related goods. Now here's where, we were talking about just a few minutes ago, but the example you gave was gas and electric cars. And what this is saying is that if two things are related and there's a change in the price of one, then there will be a change in the demand for the other. So the whole curve will shift. Not for the substitute, or not for the complement, but for the good in question. There will be a shift in demand if the price of a related good changes. And goods can be related as either being complements to one another or substitutes for one another. Okay, the fourth is consumer expectations. So expectations is a powerful force in economics. Something that can't be dismissed because we all make decisions based on our expectations. If I were to start a rumor that there was going to be a shortage of sugar, what would a lot of people do? I mean, if I convinced a lot of people that that before long you wouldn't be able to buy any sugar, then what a lot of people would do is that they would go buy 2 bags of sugar or 3 bags instead of 1 bag that they normally would. Well, why did the demand for sugar increase? Because the price didn't go down, or the price didn't change. The only thing changed is people's expectations. If people expect a shortage, then they will tend to, in this case, buy more sugar, and so what do we end up with? We end up with a shortage. Well, was there any reason for the shortage other than people expected there to be a shortage? No. I started a rumor that was based on lies. There was no reason why there was going to be a shortage of sugar, but yet people expected there to be a shortage of sugar, and so they acted on their expectations, and that thing which they feared came about. Find that interesting? See, if enough people fear a shortage of sugar, we're going to have a shortage of sugar, period. Because that's how the economy works. That's expectations. We all make decisions based on our expectations, and those expectations can change. It can be something truthful, some news that's truthful, or it can be some news that's really fabricated, but it really doesn't make any difference. because people will react based on their expectations. They would buy more of this, less of that. This is why, I've told you this before, but, bless you. If you go to YouTube and you get into, videos about the impending economic collapse and, the end of the world is upon us, a lot of these programs are put out by what kind of people? People that got prepackaged food for sale, survival type stuff. If you can convince a lot of people that the end of the world is coming and say, hey, you need a bunch of this dried food and you need this survival kit because your life may depend on it. So you got to be aware of that, right? A lot of people, a lot of businesses, try to drum up business by trying to influence people's expectations, and whether it's true or not. Whether we're headed for an economic collapse or not is really irrelevant. The only thing relevant, if you're talking about selling more of this product, the only thing relevant is what people expect. If they if they expect things to get worse, then they'll buy more of your product. So you got to be. Now that's not to say that everything is a bogus, but you do have to be a little careful of that. There is some of that on the internet that people have got something to sell, so they're trying to influence your expectations to try to increase their sales or something. Okay, if enough people expected the prices of houses to go up, what would people do? Well, can you be in the market but not buy anything? Or let's say that you want some pistachio ice cream, something I got hooked on this summer. Let's say you want some pistachio ice cream and you go into, Food Lion. I don't think Kroger sells it. I found out. But anyway, you go into Food Lion and they don't have any, so you walk out without buying anything. See, can you be in the market without buying anything? Yeah, you see. So if enough people thought that the price of houses were going to go up, then more people in the market, is everybody in the market to buy a house? No. Those people in the market are those people who are looking, right? Who are interested in buying a house. Will everyone in the market buy a house? No, they will only buy a house if they can find what they want at the price they want to pay, correct? See, not everybody in the market will end up buying, all right? So now, if people expect the price of houses to go up, then those more people in the market will buy a house. Why? Because they're thinking, if we don't buy now, then we may be forever priced out of the market when prices go up. Some people, under normal circumstances, they might say, well, we're looking for a house, and we'd like more down payment. We'd like to find just the house we want. But if they expect to be priced out of the market because of rising home prices, they might buy before they get enough down payment, or they may buy before they find their dream home. See? So if enough people expect the price of the house to go up, and therefore more people in the market demand to buy a house, what will happen to the price of houses? Well, price of houses will go up. Why did the price of houses go up? Because people expected the price of houses to go up. Was there any other reason? No. There was no other reason for prices of houses to go up other than the fact that people in the market expected the price to go up. See, so expectations can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, which of you will be wealthy someday? Those of you who expect to be wealthy. Now that's not a want to or a wish. You know, say, well, gee, I wish I could be wealthy someday. But if you expect in your heart and you believe that you will, then there's a good chance that you will. Because that's how life works. It's all based on expectations. Anyway, my point I'm making here is that consumer expectations is a powerful force when it comes to demand curves. Either shift to the right or shift to the left. Uh-oh, I didn't mean to do that. Consumer demographics. What demographics means is that there can be a shift in demand for this or that depending upon one's surroundings. Like people demand air conditioners in the summer, but not so much in the winter. You know, people demand heat in the winter, but not in the summer. People in Florida tend to spend more money in air conditioners. People in Canada tend to spend more money on heat. I mean, you know, that's demographics. Your surroundings is demographics, and your surroundings can change. You know, what could change is, you know, with American manufacturers moving offshore, there's lots of cities in America, like Detroit, that just shriveled up and died almost because they didn't have the manufacturing base to sustain their previous lifestyle. See, that's a change in demographics. When American companies voluntarily move to a foreign country, then that's a change in demographics. And that change in demographics causes a change in demand for one thing or another. And lastly, consumer tastes and preferences, I should have put in. Consumer tastes can change. Now, sometimes there's a reason for a change, sometimes there's not. You know, there was a time when we had a course here at New River on slide rules. Well, can you do a lot of mathematical computations on a slide rule still? Yeah, that hasn't changed, right? But how many of you would prefer to use a slide rule other than, than a calculator, a computer? See, well, most of us would prefer, to use the new technology, would prefer, to do our math calculations on a computer or a calculator of some sort. But that, but that is a change in taste. I mean, a change in technology brought about a change in taste, but people, could still choose to use a slide rule or typewriters, for example. Typewriters today are antiques. I mean, nobody sells typewriters anymore except antique stores, because a lot of people said, well, I can type up a paper on the typewriter, or I can type it up on, my computer, and so anyway, tastes and preferences can change. Now there are reasons why consumer tastes change, like technology, for example. But it nonetheless, it's a change in taste that can lead to an increase in demand for some things, a decrease in demand for others. And these, our modern world, wow, how quickly things change. I just did an update today on my iPad and my iPhone, and it's amazing to me how old is the iPhone. 10 years. I mean, that's incredible, right? Almost everyone in the world has an iPhone or what do you call it? Android, right? It's an iPhone or an Android, but those things have only been around for 10 years. That's amazing. So what is supply? Well, now this brings us to, there are really three parts to this chapter. The first part is demand. The second part is supply. And third part is when we put the two together and talk about the market, because the market is demand and supply. So next time we're going to talk about supply. We won't take as long as supply as we did with demand, because there's a lot of carryover. And then I'll go and talk about the market, how because markets are both. So I'll see you all next time.